The Revolution of the Dialectic by Samael Aun Weor. Prologue. We, the masters of the White Brotherhood, we, the self-conscious members of the Guardian Wall, invite all the brothers of the world to action and the profound meditation on this work. We, with the powers which have been conferred upon us by the Father of all Paternities and the supraconscious hierarchy of the invisible world of the Paramarthasatyas, invite in this instant, in this historical context, all the movements of regeneration that exist in the present world, to the serene reflection of this work and to action through its practice. The master of this work is in the process of self with all the tests which this implies in the internal worlds, before the hierarchy. This work has as its foundation the ancient schools of mysteries and the inner work of the master for his experience which he has poured into all of his works, principally, the perfect matrimony, Christmas messages, revolutionary psychology, the Great Rebellion, the mystery of the Golden Blossom, the Three Mountains and this, his psychological work. The Revolution of the Dialectic, as well as his other works. Especially the Pistis Sophia Unveiled. Reflect profoundly and serenely on this work, free of all prejudice and preconception. Try to live it according to your action of the being, thy particular illumination, thy inner intuition and according to the particular characteristic psychological trait. Observe the dynamic changes of thy own being as the particular defects disappear by means of the divine energy of our celestial mother. The foundation of all perfection. Without action, without the practice of all these psychological parameters, it would be of no use to read this book. In order to be able to know, we first have to do. Take the sword in one hand and the scale in the other and balance the study and practice each parameter. The sword is thy own spinal medulla, and the scale is the sexual energy of the third logos. The needle of the scale is the sovereign will which leads to action. Action, meditation, reflection, patience, prudence, humility and wisdom are the virtues which we shall place in thy consciousness of the being in order for you to be able to reach inner self-realization. For the good of all nations and for the good of creation, by the will of the Father of all Paternities, the Eternal Father, the absolute love of all loves, the Creator, the crystalline and pure divine fountain of all that exists and is in the visible and invisible worlds. Now, drink in its pure and crystalline waters in order for you to take its precepts to practice and thy real being to draw closer to the temples of mysteries of the invisible world. So be it. The masters of the Temple of the White Brotherhood. Reflection. Our position is absolutely independent. The revolution of the dialectic does not have any weapons other than intelligence, nor more systems other than that of wisdom. The new culture will be synthetic and with the basis of the revolution of the dialectic. This work is eminently practical, essentially ethical and profoundly dialectic. Philosophical and scientific. If they laugh at this book, if they criticize us, if they insult us, what does science matter and what to us? For the one who laughs at what he ignores is on the way to becoming an idiot. Here goes this treatise to the battlefield like a terrible lion, to unmask the traitors and to disconcert the tyrants before the solemn verdict of public consciousness. The revolution of the dialectic. Monotheism always leads to anthropomorphism, idolatry originating, by reaction, atheist materialism. That is why we prefer polytheism. We are not scared to talk about the intelligent principles of the mechanical phenomena of nature, even if they classify us as pagans. We are partisans of a modern polytheism founded on psychoironics. Monotheistic doctrines lead, in final synthesis, to idolatry. It is preferable to talk about the intelligent principles which never lead to materialism. The abuse of polytheism in turn leads, by reaction, to monotheism. Modern monotheism surged from the abuse of polytheism. In the era of Aquarius, in this new phase of the revolution of the dialectic, polytheism should be sketched psychologically in a transcendental manner, and besides, it should be put forward intelligently. We have to make a very wise stating with a vital and integral monistic polytheism. Monistic polytheism is the synthesis of polytheism and monotheism. Variety is unity. In the revolution of the dialectic, the terms good and evil, as well as those of evolution and involution, God or religion, are not employed. In these senile and degenerate times, the revolution of the dialectic, self-dialectic, and a new education are necessary. In the age of the revolution of the dialectic, the art of reasoning should be handled directly by the being in order for it to be methodical and just. An art of objective reasoning will provide the pedagogic and integral change. All the actions of our life should be the result of an equation and an exact formula in order for the possibilities of the mind and the functionalisms of understanding to surge forth. The revolution of the dialectic has the precise clue to create an emancipated mind, to form minds free of conditioning, free of the concept of option, unitotal. The revolution of the dialectic is not dictatorial norms of the mind. The revolution of the dialectic does not seek to abuse intellectual liberty. The revolution of the dialectic wants to teach how one should think. The revolution of the dialectic does not want to cage or imprison thought. The revolution of the dialectic wants the integration of all the values of the human being. The teaching. Only life intensely lived gives a lasting wisdom, but the mind, which is the one that causes us to commit errors, impedes us from arriving at the amphitheater of cosmic science. The errors of the mind are those eyes or psychological defects which the intellectual animal falsely called man carries in his interior. The psychological defects are in the 49 levels of the subconscious. We cannot recognize or find the eyes or egos of the 49 subconscious levels, since each of them has parts in our different bodies. For that, we should appeal to a force that is superior to the mind to disintegrate them with its serpentine fire, the latter being our Divine Mother Kundalini. Only the Mother Kundalini of the Hindu mysteries knows the 49 levels of the subconsciousness. The psychological defects studied do not form part of our being. After having studied the psychological defect by means of meditation, one supplicates to Rami Eve O, the Mother Kundalini, to disintegrate it during sexual superdynamics with the sexual energy. By means of the intellect and reflection, we cannot get to see a defect in the mind, everyone remains stagnant there, for we do not know the other 7 bodies of the mind where the ego has its den. The mind, intellect, reason, all the more subjective forms with which the human being works, can never reach the profound levels of the subconscious where the ego continuously develops its films which put our consciousness to sleep. Only the Kundalini, with its sexual fire, can reach those 49 levels to definitely disintegrate that which causes us pain, that which has us in misery, that which people painfully love, that which materialistic psychology has wanted to deify, that which is called ego and which the revolution of the dialectic wants to destroy in order to achieve integral revolution. Chapter 1. The one who feels pain or feels hurt when slandered, accused, or false witness borne against him, it is a sign that he still has alive the eye of pride. The didactic of the dissolution of the eye. The best didactic for the dissolution of the eye is found in practical life intensely lived. Interrelationship is a marvelous mirror in which the eye can be contemplated at full length. In relationship with our fellow men, the defects that are hidden in the subconscious depths flourish spontaneously, they leap out, because the subconscious betrays us, and if we are in a state of alert perception, then we see them just as they are in themselves. For the Gnostic, the best joy is to celebrate the discovery of one of his defects. Discover defect, dead defect. When we discover a defect, we should see it in the scene like someone who is watching a movie, but without justify or condemning. It is not enough to comprehend the psychological defect intellectually. It is necessary to submerge ourselves into profound inner meditation to catch the defect in the levels of the mind. The mind has many levels and profundities, and as long as we have not comprehended a defect in all the levels of the mind, we will have done nothing, and the latter will continue existing like a tempting demon in the depth of our own subconscious. When a defect is integrally comprehended in all the levels of the mind, then the defect disintegrates, upon disintegrating and reducing to cosmic dust the I which characterizes it. This is how we keep on dying from instant to instant. This is how we keep establishing in ourselves a permanent center of consciousness, a center of permanent gravity. Within every human being who is not in the final state of degeneration, exists the Buddhata, the interior Buddhist principle, the psychic material or materia prima to fabricate that which is called soul. The pluralized I foolishly spends said psychic material in absurd atomic explosions of envy, covetousness, hatred, jealousies, fornications, attachments, vanity, etc. As the pluralized I die from instant to instant, the psychic material accumulates within us, becoming a permanent center of consciousness. This is how we individualize ourselves little by little. By desegretizing ourselves, we individualize ourselves. However, we clarify that individuality is not everything. With the event of Bethlehem, we should move on to superindividuality. The work of the dissolution of the I is something very serious. We need to study ourselves profoundly in all the levels of the mind. The I is a book of many chapters. We need to study our dialectic, thoughts, emotions, actions from instant to instant, without justifying or condemning. We need to integrally comprehend in all the profundities of the mind, each and every one of our defects. The pluralized I is the subconscious. When we dissolve the I, the subconscious becomes consciousness. We need to convert the subconscious into consciousness, and that is only possible by achieving the annihilation of the I. When the consciousness moves on to occupy the place of the subconscious, we acquire that which is called continuous consciousness. The one who enjoys continuous consciousness lives consciously at every instant, not only in the physical world but also in the superior worlds. The present humanity is 97% subconscious, and that is why it sleeps profoundly not only in the physical world, but also in the supersensible worlds during the sleep of the physical body and after death. We need the death of the I. We need to die from instant to instant, here and now, not only in the physical world, but also in all the planes of the cosmic mind. We should be merciless towards ourselves and carry out the dissection of the I with the great scalpel of self-criticism. The struggle of the opposites. A great master said, "Seek enlightenment, for all else will be added on to you." Enlightenment's worst enemy is the I. It is necessary to know that the I is a knot in the flow of existence, a fatal obstruction in the flow of life free in its movement. A master was asked, "Which is the way?" "What a magnificent mountain," he said, referring to the mountain where he had his haven. "I do not ask you about the mountain. Instead, I ask you about the path. As long as you cannot go beyond the mountain, you will not be able to find the way," answered the master. Another monk asked the same question to that same master. "There it is, right before your eyes," the master answered him. "Why can I not see it?" "Because you have egotistical ideas." "Will I be able to see it, sir?" As long as you have a dualistic vision and you say, "I cannot," and so on, your eyes will be blinded by that relative vision. When there is no I nor you, can it be seen? When there is no I nor you, who wants to see? The foundation of the I is the dualism of the mind. The I is sustained by the battle of the opposites. All thinking is founded on the battle of the opposites. If we say, "So and so is tall," we want to say that he is not short. If we say that we are entering, we want to say that we are not exiting. If we say that we are happy, with that we affirm that we are not sad, etc. The problems of life are nothing but mental forms with two poles, one positive and the other negative. Problems are sustained by the mind and are created by the mind. When we stop thinking on a problem, the latter ends inevitably. Happiness and sadness, pleasure and pain, good and evil, victory and defeat, constitute the battle of the opposites on which the I is founded. The entire miserable life that we live goes from one opposite to another: victory, defeat, like, dislike, pleasure, pain, failure, success, this, that, etc. We need to free ourselves of the tyranny of the opposites. This is only possible by learning to live from instant to instant without abstractions of any type, without dreams, without fantasies. Hast thou observed how the stones of the road are pale and pure after a torrential rain? One can only murmur an "oh" of admiration. We should comprehend that "oh" of things without deforming that divine exclamation with the battle of the opposites. Joshu asked the Master Nansen, "What is the Tao?" "Ordinary life," replied Nansen. "What does one do to live in accordance with it?" If you try to live in accordance with it, it will flee away from you. Do not try to sing that song, let it sing itself. Does not the humble hiccups come by itself? Remember this phrase: gnosis lives in deeds, withers away in abstractions, and is difficult to find even in the noblest of thoughts. They asked the master Bakujo, do we have to dress and eat daily? How could we escape from this? The master replied, we eat, we get dressed. I do not comprehend, said the disciple. Then get dressed and eat, said the master. This is precisely action free of the opposites. Do we eat? Do we get dressed? Why makes a problem of that? Why think of other things while we are eating and getting dressed? If you are eating, eat. If you are getting dressed, get dressed. And if you are walk on the street, walk, 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 but do not think of something else. Do only what you are doing. Do not run away from facts. Do not fill them with so many meanings, symbols, sermons, and warnings. Live them without allegories. Live them with a receptive mind from instant to instant. Comprehend that I am talking to you about the path of action, free of the painful battle of the opposites. Action without distractions, without evasions, without fantasies, without abstractions of any kind. Change thy character, beloved, change it through intelligent action, free of the battle of the opposites. When the doors are closed to fantasy, the organ of intuition is awakened. Action, free of the battle of the opposites, is intuitive action, full action. Where there is plenitude, the eye is absent. Intuitive action leads us by the hand to the awakening of consciousness. Let us work and rest happily, abandoning ourselves to the course of life. Let us exhaust the turbid and rotten water of habitual thinking, and in the emptiness will flow gnosis, and with it the happiness of living. This intelligent action, free of the battle of the opposites, elevates us to a point in which something must break. When everything marches well, the rigid roof of thinking breaks, and the light and the power of the inner self enters like a flood into the mind which has stopped dreaming. Then in the physical world and outside of it, during the sleep of the material body, we live totally conscious and enlightened, enjoying the joy of life in the superior worlds. This continuous tension of the mind, this discipline, takes us to the awakening of consciousness. If we are eating and thinking about business, it is clear that we are dreaming. If we are driving an automobile and we are thinking of our fiancé, it is logical that we are not awake, we are dreaming. If we are working and we are remembering our child's godfather or godmother, or our friend or brother, etc., it is clear that we are dreaming. People who live dreaming in the physical world also live dreaming in the internal worlds during hours in which the physical body is sleeping. One needs to cease dreaming in the internal worlds. When we stop dreaming in the physical world, we awaken here and now, and that awakening appears in the internal worlds. First seek enlightenment, and all else shall be added on to you. Whoever is enlightened sees the way. Whoever is not enlightened cannot see the way, and can easily be led astray from the path and fall into the abyss. Terrible is the effort and the vigilance needed from second to second, from instant to not fall into illusions. 1 minute of unawareness is enough, and the mind is already dreaming upon recalling something, upon thinking of something different from the job or deed that we are living at the moment. When in the physical world we learn to be awake from instant to instant, we shall live awake and self-conscious from instant to instant in the internal worlds during the hours of sleep of the physical body, and also after death. It is painful to know that the consciousness of all human beings sleeps and dreams profoundly, not only during those hours of rest of the physical body, but also during that state ironically called the vigil state. Action free of mental dualism produces the awakening of consciousness. The KM. I have to declare before the solemn verdict of public opinion that the fundamental aim of every Gnostic student is to become a KM, a cosmos man. All of us human beings live in a cosmos. The word cosmos means order. And this is something that we should never forget. The cosmos man is a being who has perfect order in his 5 centers, in his mind and in his essence. In order to get to be a cosmos man, it is necessary to learn to know how the 3 primary forces of the universe, positive, negative, and neutral, manifest themselves. But on the path which leads to the cosmos man, which is totally positive, we see that every positive force is always opposed by a negative force. Through self-observation, we should perceive the mechanism of the opposing force. Whenever we propose to carry out a special action, whether it be the annihilation of the ego, the dominion of sex, a special work, or execute a definite program, we should observe and calculate the force of resistance, because by nature, the world and its mechanics tends to provoke the resistance, and such resistance is double. The more gigantic that the enterprise is, the greater will the resistance be. If we learn to calculate the resistance, we will also be able to develop the enterprise with success. That is where the capacity of the genius of the enlightened is. Resistance. Resistance is the opposing force. Resistance is the secret weapon of the ego. Resistance is the psychic force of the ego opposed to us becoming conscious of all our psychological defects. With resistance, the ego tends to leave on a tangent and postulates excuses to silence or hide the error. Due to resistance, dreams become difficult to interpret, and the knowledge that one wants to have of oneself becomes clouded. Resistance acts upon a defense mechanism which tries to omit unpleasant psychological errors, so as not to have consciousness of them and for one to continue in psychological slavery. But, in reality of truth, I have to say that there are mechanisms to overcome resistance, and they are: 1. Recognize it. 2. Define it. 3. Comprehend it. 4. Work on it. 5. Overcome and disintegrate it by means of sexual superdynamics. But the ego will struggle during the analysis of the resistance in order for the fallacies not to be discovered, which put in danger the dominion it has over our mind. At the moment of the struggle of the ego, one has to appeal to a power that is superior to the mind, which is the fire of the Kundalini serpent of the Hindu. Practice. With the practice, the experience, or the living of any of the works that I have delivered to humanity, the practitioner would achieve, it is obvious, psychological emancipation. There exist people that speak marvels about reincarnation, Atlantis, alchemy, the ego, astral unfoldment, and before the external world they are experts on these matters, but this is only being intellectually informed. Deep down, these persons do not know anything. And at the hour of death, these expositors remain with nothing but knowledge stored in their memory, that in the beyond does not serve any purpose because they continue with their consciousness asleep. If one is only imprisoned in theories, if one has not carried out anything practical, if one has not become conscious of what I have taught in the books, if we leave the teachings in the memory, it can be said that we have wasted our time miserably. Memory is the formative principle of the intellectual center. When a person aspires to something more, when someone looks through the limitations of the subconscious and sees that which he has deposited in the memory and analyzes and meditates on the last occurrence or teachings of an esoteric book, then those values move to the emotional phase of the same intellectual center. When one wants to know the deep meaning of said teachings and the person surrenders in full to meditation, obviously such teachings move on to the emotional center properly said, and they then come to be felt in the depth of the soul. When one has cleanly lived the teachings, the cognoscible values of the essence, then, at last, they remain deposited in the consciousness and are never lost again. The essence comes to be enriched with the same. Now we comprehend which is the way to becoming conscious of the Gnostic teachings that I have delivered in the books that I have previously written, and in this one also. Meditation is formidable to make us conscious of the Gnostic teachings. But let us not commit the error of leaving the teachings exclusively in theories or in the memory, because if we proceed in this manner, we will never achieve the dominion of the mind. The requirement. The crude reality of facts comes to demonstrate to us that many are those who have not comprehended the transcendence of the Gnostic esoteric work, and that a great majority are not good householders. When one is not a good householder, it is clear that one is not prepared to enter the path of the razor's edge. In order to work in the revolution of the dialectic, one needs to have reached the level of a good householder. A fanatic, lunatic, whimsical type of person, etc., cannot be good for integral revolution. A subject who does not fulfill the duties of his home cannot achieve the great change. A person who is a bad father, bad wife, or bad husband, or who abandons his home for this or that man or woman, will never be able to arrive at radical transformation. The cornerstone of revolutionary psychology is in the requirement of having a perfect equilibrium at home, whether being a good husband, good father, good brother, and good son. Perfect fulfillment of the duties which exist towards suffering humanity, becoming a decent person. Whoever does not fulfill these requirements will never be able to advance in these revolutionary studies. Defeatism. The intellectual animal, falsely called man, has the fixed idea that the total annihilation of the ego, the absolute dominion of sex, and the intimate self-realization of the being is something fantastic and impossible. However, he does not realize that this very subjective way of thinking is the fruit of defeatist psychological elements that manipulate the mind and the body of those persons who have not awakened consciousness. The people of this senile and degenerated era carry in their interior a psychic aggregate. That is a great obstacle on the path of the annihilation of the ego, and that is defeatism. Defeatist thoughts handicap persons from elevating their mechanistic life to superior states. The majority of persons consider themselves defeated even before beginning the struggle or the Gnostic esoteric work. One has to observe oneself and analyze oneself to discover within oneself, here and now, those facets that make up that which is called defeatism. Synthesizing, we say that there exist three common defeatist attitudes. 1. To feel handicapped because of a lack of intellectual education. 2. To feel incapable of beginning the radical transformation. 3. To walk around with the psychological song, I never have opportunities to change or to triumph. First attitude. On feeling handicapped because of a lack of education, we have to remember that the great sages such as Hermes Trismegistus, Paracelsus, Plato, Socrates, Jesus the Christ, Homer, etc., never went to university because in the reality of truth, each person has his own master, the latter being the being, that which is beyond the mind and false rationalism. Do not confuse education with wisdom and knowledge. The specific knowledge of the mysteries of life, of the cosmos and of nature is an extraordinary force that allows us to achieve integral revolution. Second attitude. The robots programmed by the Antichrist materialistic science feel at a disadvantage because they do not feel capable, and this we should analyze. The intellectual animal, because of the influence of a false academic education that adulterates the values of the being, has made in his sensual mind two terrible eyes which should be eliminated: the fixed idea, I am going to lose, and laziness to practice the Gnostic techniques to acquire knowledge that is needed to emancipate ourselves from all mechanicity and come out, once and for all, from the defeatist tendency. Third attitude. The thinking of the mechanical man is, opportunities are never provided to me. The scenes of existence can be modified. One creates his own circumstances. Everything is the result of the law of action and consequence, but with the possibility that a superior law transcends an inferior law. The elimination of the I of defeatism is urgent, undelayable. It is not the quantity of theories that matter, it is the quantity of super efforts that are exerted in the work of the revolution of consciousness. The authentic man fabricates, in the moment that he wishes, the opportune moments for his spiritual or psychological growth. Psycho-astrology. It is written with lit embers in the book of life that everyone who achieves the total elimination of the ego can get to change his sign and its influences at will. In the name of truth, I have to declare that the one who is within me has changed signs at will. The sign of my ex-personality was Pisces, but now I am of Aquarius, a terribly revolutionary sign. We cannot deny that the influences of the signs exist and manipulate us as long as the psychological revolution has not been carried out within us. But in the path of every student who aspires to enlightenment, one should begin by revolutionizing oneself against what the horoscopes establish. That matter of one sign not being compatible with another sign is totally absurd, because what is not compatible are the egos, those undesirable elements which we carry within. The astrology of these times of the end is not good for anything because it is pure business. The authentic astrology of the Chaldean sages has already been forgotten. People machines do not want to change because they say, that is my sign, that is my zodiacal influence, etc. I will never get tired of emphasizing that what is important is to change emotionally and mentally. One needs to change mentally in order for the authentic zodiacal forces which emanate from the being, from the Milky Way, that will give us a permanent center of gravity, to penetrate and become manifest in us. We must not seek the light in horoscopes. The light surges forth when we have eliminated from ourselves the particular psychological characteristic trait and when we have created a new flask, the mind, to pour into it the teachings of psychoastrology which I have taught in my work Zodiacal course. The being and the Divine Mother are the only ones that can emancipate us from newspaper and cheap magazine horoscopes, thus giving us integral education. We have to shake off the dust of the centuries from ourselves and eliminate all our rancid customs and beliefs and leave astrological fanaticism. That it is my zodiacal influence and what remedy does it have, is such a subjective manner of thinking which is a sophism of distraction of the ego. The rhetoric of the ego. By analyzing the three-brained biped called man, we arrive at the logical conclusion that he does not yet have a permanent center of consciousness, of gravity. We cannot affirm that human bipeds are individualized. We are sure that they are only instinctualized. In other words, that they are only impelled by egos which manipulate the instinctive center at their pleasure. The beloved ego does not have any individuality. It is a sum of discord factors, a sum of small loose cathexis egotistical psychic energies. Each small eye of those which constitute the legion called ego really has its own personal criteria, its own projects, its own ideas and its own rhetoric. The rhetoric of the ego is the art of speaking well and with elegance, in such a subtle manner that we do not realize at what moment we have already fallen into error. The rhetoric of the ego is so subliminal that due to that reason, our consciousness is as asleep as it is and without us realizing it. We see the ego with its rhetoric leading countries on an arms race. The volume of heavy commerce airplanes, warships and armored transport among the third world countries duplicated between 1973 and 1976, while their imports doubled. The interesting thing is that in an age in which they talk arms control and peace, the countries in the process of supposed development with the help of the supposedly industrialized increase their capacity of destruction. Is this, it is appropriate to ask, the adequate road to disarmament and world peace? Quite the contrary. It is the rhetoric of the ego. While human bipeds continue fascinated with inventions and with all the apparent marvels of the Antichrist materialistic science, in Ethiopia, since 1973 to the present, 200,000 persons have died of hunger. Is this civilization? This is the rhetoric of the ego. The human biped only wants to live in his tiny world, which is no longer good for anything. Materialistic psychology, experimental psychology, is good for nothing. The proof is that it has not been able to solve the mental problems which affect the country of the United States. Proof of it is that in the large cities of the American Union, the famous gangs continue multiplying. Let's take a look. In New York City exist the Dirty Ones, a group whose members are of some 30 years of age. They use dirty clothes and leather boots. They meet on house roofs and pride themselves on being considered good billiard players. The unknown cyclists, also of more or less the same age, dress in the fashion of the Hells Angels and wear leather jackets with big zippers. Their bicycles are old Schwinn which have been adapted with elongated forks to resemble motorcycles. Violence is an accepted part of their lives, in each of the thousands of members and gangs which exist in that country and which, painfully, human bipeds of other countries want to imitate. Is this psychological liberation? False. This is the rhetoric of the ego, which has deceived everyone. It is only by living the teachings which I deliver in this entire authentic treatise of revolutionary psychology put into practice, that human bipeds will be able to free themselves from the rhetoric of the ego. The permanent center of consciousness. Three-brained bipeds do not have any individuality. They do not have a permanent center of consciousness, PCC. Each of his thoughts, feelings and actions depend on the calamity of the eye so that at a specific moment it may control the capital centers of the human machine. Those of us who, during many years of sacrifice and pain, have been struggling for the Gnostic movement, were able to see terrible things in practice. With tears in their eyes, many swore to work for Gnosis until the end of their days. They promised eternal fidelity to the great cause and pronounced tremendous speeches. And what happened? What became of their tears of blood? What became of their great oaths? Everything was useless. It was only a fleeting eye of an instant that swore. But when another eye replaced the one that swore fidelity, the individual withdrew from gnosis or betrayed the great cause or joined other little schools betraying the Gnostic institutions. Really, the human being cannot have continuity of purposes because he does not have the PCC. He is not an individual and he has an I which is a sum of many small I. Many are those who await the eternal beatitude with the death of the physical body. However, the death of the body does not resolve the problem of the I. Beyond death, the loose cathexis, the ego, continues enveloped in its molecular body. The human biped ends, but the loose cathexis continues, the energy of the ego in its molecular body, and then, later, the ego perpetuates itself in our descendants. It returns to satisfy its desires and to continue the same tragedies. The hour has arrived to comprehend the necessity of producing within us a definite integral revolution in order to establish the PCC, a permanent center of consciousness. It is only in this manner that we individualize ourselves. It is only in this manner that we cease being legion. It is only in this manner that we become conscious individuals. The man of today is similar to a ship full of many passengers. Each passenger has his own plans and projects. The man of today does not have a single mind, he has many minds. Each eye has its own mind. Fortunately, within the human biped exists something else, the essence. Reflecting seriously on said principle, we can conclude that this is the most elevated psychic material with which we can give shape to our soul. By awakening the essence, we create a soul. To awaken the essence is to awaken con, and to awaken consciousness is equivalent to creating within us a PCC. Only the one who awakens consciousness becomes an individual. However, the individual is not the end. Later, we have to reach superindividuality. Superindividuality. We need to desegatize ourselves in order to individualize ourselves, and then superindividualize ourselves. We need to dissolve the I in order to have the PCC that we studied in the previous chapter. The pluralized I foolishly wastes the psychic material in atomic explosions of anger, covetousness, lust, envy, pride, laziness, gluttony, etc. Once the I is dead, the psychic material accumulates within us, becoming the PCC. Nowadays, the human being, or we should better say, the biped that auto-classifies himself as human, is really a machine that is controlled by the legion of the I. Let us observe the tragedy of people in love. How many promises? How many tears? How many good intentions? And what happens? Only the sad memory of all that remains. They marry, time transpires, the man falls in love with another woman, or the wife falls in love with another man, and the castle in the air falls to the ground. Why? Because the human does not yet have his PCC. The small I which swears eternal love is replaced by another small I which has nothing to do with aid promise. That is all. We need to become individuals, and this is only possible by creating a PCC. We need to create a PCC, and this is only possible by dissolving the pluralized I. All the inner contradictions of the human being would be enough to drive insane anyone who could see them in a mirror. The source of such contradictions is the plurality of the I. Whoever wants to dissolve the I has to begin by knowing his inner contradictions. Unfortunately, people like deceiving themselves in order to not see their own contradictions. Whoever wants to dissolve the I has to begin by not being a liar. All people are liars unto themselves, everyone lies to himself. If we want to know the plurality of the I and our perennial contradictions, we should not deceive ourselves. People deceive themselves in order to not see their internal contradictions. With just reason, everyone who discovers his intimate contradictions feels ashamed of himself. He comprehends that he is nobody, that he is a wretched person, a miserable worm of the earth. To discover our own intimate contradictions is already a success, because our inner judgment is spontaneously liberated, permitting us to see with clarity the path of individuality and that of superindividuality. Integral well-being I. We need integral well-being. We all suffer, we have bitterness in life. And we want to change. In any case, I think that integral well-being is the result of self-respect. This would seem quite strange to an economist, to a theosophist, etc. What could self-respect have to do with economic matters, with problems related with labor or with the labor force, with capital, etc.? I want to comment the following. Our level of being attracts our own life. We used to live in a very beautiful house in Mexico City. Behind that house there was a very large lot of land which was empty. One ordinary day, a group of parachutists, as we call them, invaded that land. Soon they built their cardboard huts and established themselves there. Unquestionably, they became something dirty in that colony. I do not want to underestimate them, but if their cardboard huts were really clean, I would not object to anything about them. Unfortunately, a frightening lack of hygiene existed among those people. I observed the life of those persons very carefully from the roof of the house. They insulted each other, hurt each other, they did not respect their fellow men, in synthesis. Their life was horrifying, with miseries and abominations. If police patrol cars were not seen there before, now the police were always visiting the colony. If that colony was peaceful before, afterwards it became an inferno. In this manner I was able to evince that the level of being attracts our own life, that is obvious. Let us suppose that one of those inhabitants resolved from one day to the next to respect himself and to respect others. Obviously, he would change. What is understood by respecting oneself? To abandon delinquency, to not steal, to not fornicate, to not commit adultery, to not envy the well-being of one's fellow man, to be humble and simple, abandon laziness and become an active, clean, decent person, etc. Upon respecting himself, a citizen changes his level of being, and upon changing his level of being, he unquestionably attracts new circumstances, for he relates with more decent persons, with different people, and possibly, that type of relations provokes an economic and social change in his existence. In this manner, what I am saying would be fulfilled, that integral self-respect provokes social and economic well-being. But if one does not know how to respect oneself, he will also not respect his fellow men and will condemn himself to a wretched and unhappy life. The beginning of integral well-being is in self-respect. Self-reflection. Let us not forget that the exterior is merely the reflection of the interior. That has already been said by Immanuel Kant, the philosopher of Königsberg. If we carefully study the Critique of Pure Reason, we certainly discover that the exterior is the interior, textual words of one of the great thinkers of all times. The exterior image of man and the circumstances which surround him are the result of self-image. This compound word, self and image, is profoundly significant. Precisely, the photograph of James comes to my memory in these moments. One takes a photograph of our friend James and as something interesting, two James come out, one that is very still, in a position of attention, with the face looking forward, the other appears walking in front of him with the face in a different position, etc. How is it possible that two James appear in one photograph? I believe that it is worthwhile to enlarge that photograph, because it can serve to show it to all the persons who become interested in these studies. Obviously, I think that the second James would be the self-reflection of the first James. That is obvious, for it is written that the exterior image of man and the circumstances which surround him are the result of self-image. It is also written that the exterior is merely the reflection of the interior. So, if we do not respect ourselves, if the interior image of ourselves is very poor, if we are full of psychological defects, of moral scum, unquestionably, unpleasant events will surge in the exterior world, such as economic, social difficulties, etc. Let us not forget that the exterior image of man and the circumstances which surround him are the result of his self-image. We all have a self-image, and outside exists the physical image which can be photographed, but within we have another image. To clarify better, we will say that outside we have the physical and perceptible image, and inside we have the image of a psychological and hypersensible type. If outside, We have a poor and miserable image, and if this image is accompanied by unpleasant circumstances, a difficult economic situation, problems of all types, conflicts, whether at home, at work, on the street, etc., this is simply because our psychological image is poor, defective, and horrifying, and we reflect our misery, our nothingness, what we are, on the environment. If we want to change, we need a total and great change. Image, values, and identity should change radically. In several of my works I have said that each of us is a mathematical point in space that agrees to serve as a vehicle to a specific sum of values. Some serve as vehicles to genial values and others could serve as vehicles to mediocre values. That is why each person is each person. The majority of human beings serve as vehicles to the values of the ego, the I. These values can be optimal or negative. Therefore, image, values, and identity are a single whole. I say that we should undergo a radical transformation, and I affirm in an emphatic manner that identity, values, and image should be totally changed. We need a new identity, new values, and a new image. This is psychological revolution, inner revolution. It is absurd to continue within the vicious circle in which we actually move. We need to change integrally. The self-image of a man originates his exterior image. Upon saying self-image, I am referring to the psychological image that we have within. What could our psychological image be? Could it be that of the irate, of the covetous, of the lustful, of the envious, of the proud, of the lazy, of the glutton, or what? Whichever be the image that we have of ourselves, or we should better say, the self-image, will originate, as is natural, the exterior image. The exterior image, even if it is well dressed, could be poor. Is perhaps the image of the proud a beautiful image, of someone who has become unbearable, that does not have a grain of humility? How does a lustful person behave? How does he live? What aspect does his bedroom present? What is his behavior in his or her intimate life with the opposite sex? Or maybe he or she is already degenerated? What could be the external image of an envious person, of someone who suffers because of his fellow man's well-being and who in secrecy causes harm to others out of envy? What is the image of a lazy person who does not want to work and is dirty and abominable? And that of a glutton. Truly, therefore, the exterior image is the result of the interior image, and this is irrefutable. If a man learns to respect himself, he changes his life, not only within the field of ethics or that of psychology, but also within the social, economic, and even political field. But we have to change. That is why I insist that identity, values, and image should be changed. The present identity, values, and image that we have of ourselves are miserable. Due to this, social life is full of conflicts and economic problems. No one is happy nowadays, no one is joyful. But could the image, values, and identity that we have be changed? Could we take up a new identity, new values, and new image? I clearly affirm that it is possible. Unquestionably, we would need to disintegrate the ego. We all have an I. When we knock on a door, we are asked, "Who is it?" We answer, "Me." But who is that me? Who is that myself? Really and truly, the ego is a sum of negative and positive values. We could disintegrate the ego, put an end to those positive and negative values, and then we could serve as a vehicle to new values, the values of the being. But in that case, we need a new didactic if we want to eliminate all the values which we presently have in order to provoke a change. Psychoanalysis. The didactic that exists to know and eliminate the positive and negative values which we carry within exists, and is called inner psychoanalysis. It is necessary to appeal to inner psychoanalysis. When one appeals to inner psychoanalysis to know the defects of a psychological type, a great difficulty surges forth. I want to refer emphatically to the force of countertransference. One can investigate oneself, one can introvert oneself, but when one attempts it, the difficulty of countertransference surges. But the solution is in transferring our attention inwards with the purpose of exploring oneself, in order to know ourselves and to eliminate the negative values which harm us psychologically in social life, in economics, politics, and even in the spiritual aspect. Unfortunately, I repeat, when one tries to introvert oneself in order to explore oneself and to know oneself, countertransference immediately surges. Countertransference is a force which makes introversion difficult. If countertransference did not exist, introversion would be easier. We need inner psychoanalysis. We need intimate self-investigation in order to really know ourselves. Homo nos te ipsum. Man, know yourself and you will know the universe and the gods. When one knows oneself, one can change. As long as one does not know oneself, any change will result subjective. But before anything else, we need self-analysis. How is the force of countertransference, which makes intimate psychoanalysis or self-analysis difficult, overcome? This would only be possible by means of transactional analysis and structural analysis. When one appeals to structural analysis, one knows those psychological structures which make intimate introspection difficult and impossible. By knowing such structures we comprehend them, and by comprehending them we can then overcome the obstacle. But we need something else. We also need transactional analysis. Bank, commercial transactions, etc. exist. In the same manner that psychological transactions exist, the different psychic elements which we carry in our interior are subject to transactions, to exchanges, to struggles, to changes of position, etc. They are not something motionless, they always exist in a state of motion. When one, by means of transactional analysis, knows the different psychological processes, the different structures, then the difficulty in psychological introspection concludes. Afterwards, the self-exploration of oneself is carried out with full success. The one who achieves full self-exploration of such and such a defect, whether it is to know anger, or to know covetousness, lust, laziness, gluttony, etc., can carry out formidable psychological progress. In order to achieve full self-exploration, one will have to first begin by segregating the defect that we want to eliminate from ourselves in order for it to be dissolved afterwards. A disintegrated defect liberates a percentage of psychic essence. As we disintegrate each of our false values, in other words, our defects, the psychic essence which is bottled up within them will be liberated, and finally, the totally liberated essence will radically transform us. It will be in that precise instant that the eternal values of the being will be expressed through us. Unquestionably, this would be marvelous not only for ourselves but also for humanity. When we have managed to disintegrate or dissolve the negative values, we will respect ourselves and others, becoming, we would say, a fountain of kindness for the entire world, a perfect, conscious and marvelous creature. That mystical self-image of an awake man will consequently, or as a corollary, originate the perfect image of a noble citizen. His circumstances will also be beneficial in every sense. He will be a golden link in the great universal chain of life. He will be an example for the entire world, a fountain of joy for many beings, an enlightened one in the most transcendental sense of the word, someone who will enjoy continuous and delightful ecstasy. Mental dynamics. In mental dynamics, we need to know how and why the mind functions. Unquestionably, the mind is an instrument which we should learn to use consciously. But it would be absurd for such an instrument to be efficient if we first did not know the how and why of the mind. When one knows the how and the why of the mind, when one knows the different functionalisms of the mind, one can control it, and the latter becomes a useful and perfect instrument, a marvelous instrument through which we can work for the benefit of humanity. Truly, one needs a realistic system if we really want to know the potential of the human mind. In these times, many systems abound for the control of the mind. There are those who think that certain artificial exercises can be magnificent for the control of the mind. There are schools, much theory exists about the mind, many systems exist, but how would it be possible to make something useful of the mind? Let us reflect that if we do not know the how and the why of the mind, we will not be able to get the latter to be perfect. We need to know the different functionalisms of the mind if we want the latter to be perfect. How does it function? Why does it function? That how and why are definitive. If, for example, we throw a stone into a lake, we will see that waves are formed. These are the reactions of the lake, of the water, against the stone. Similarly, if someone tells us an ironic word, this word reaches the mind and the mind reacts against such a word. Conflicts then follow. The entire world is in problems. The entire world lives in conflicts. I have carefully observed the debate panels of many organizations, schools, etc. They do not respect each other. Why? Because they do not respect themselves. Observe a Senate, a Chamber of Representatives, or simply a school board. If someone says something, another feels alluded to. Become angry and says something worse. They quarrel among themselves and the members of the board of directors end up in a great chaos. This reaction of the mind of each of them against the impacts of the exterior world is very serious. One has to truly appeal to introspective psychoanalysis to explore one's own mind. It is necessary to know ourselves a little more within the intellectual sphere. For example, why do we react before the words of a fellow man? In these conditions, we are always victims. If someone wants us to be content, it is enough for that person to give us a few pats on the shoulder and tell us a few amiable words. If someone wants to see us upset, it would be enough to tell us a few unpleasant words. Therefore, where is our true intellectual freedom? Which one is it? We concretely depend on others, we are slaves, our psychological processes depend exclusively on other persons, we do not rule over our own psychological processes, and this is terrible. Others are the ones who rule in us and in our intimate processes. A friend all of a sudden comes and invites us to a party, we go to the friend's house, he gives us a drink, we feel shy accepting it, we drink it, another drink follows, and we also drink it, then another, and another until we end up drunk. The friend was the lord and master of our psychological processes. Could a mind like that be good for anything? If someone rules in us, if the entire world has the right to rule us, then where is our intellectual freedom? Which is it? Suddenly, we are before a person of the opposite sex, we become very identified with that person finally, we end up in fornications and adulteries. It means that that person of the opposite sex had the upper hand and overcame our psychological process, that person controlled us, subjected us to his or her own will. Is this freedom? The intellectual animal, falsely called man, in the reality of truth has been educated to deny his identity, values, and image. Which is the authentic identity, values, and intimate image of each of us? Is it perhaps the ego or the personality? No. By means of introspective psychoanalysis, we can go beyond the ego and discover the being. Unquestionably, the being in himself is our authentic identity, values, and image. The being in himself is the KM, the cosmos man or man cosmos. Unfortunately, as I have already said it, the animal, falsely called man, has educated himself to deny his inner values, has fallen into the materialism of this degenerated era, has surrendered himself to all the vices of the earth and treads the path of error. To accept the negative culture subjectively inspired in our interior, following the path of least resistance, is an error. Unfortunately, people of today enjoy following the path of least resistance and accept the false materialistic culture of these times. They allow it to become installed in their psyche, and this is how they arrive at the denial of the true values of the being. The laconic action of the being. The laconic action of the being is the concise manifestation, the brief actuation which the real being of each of us carries out in a manner that is synthetic, mathematical, and exact like a Pythagorean table. I want you to reflect very well on the laconic action of the being. Remember that above, in infinite space, in the starry space, every action is the result of an equation and an exact formula. Likewise, from mere logical deduction, we should emphatically affirm that our true image, the inner cosmic man, is beyond false values, is perfect. Unquestionably, each action of the being is the result of an equation and exact formula. There have been cases in which the being has succeeded in expressing himself through someone who has achieved a change of image, values, and identity, and then, that someone has, in fact, become a prophet, an enlightened one. But there have also been lamentable cases of persons who have served as vehicles of the being himself and in truth have not comprehended the intentions of the divine. When someone who serves as a vehicle of the being does not work disinterestedly in favor of humanity, he has not understood that he is an equation and an exact formula of every laconic action of the being. Only the one who renounces the fruits of action, who does not expect any reward whatsoever, who is only motivated by love to work in favor of his fellow men, has certainly comprehended the laconic action of the being. I repeat, we need to undergo a total change of ourselves. Image, values, and identity should change. How beautiful it is to have the young image of a terrestrial man, but we should, and it is better to have the spiritual and celestial image here and now in flesh and bones. Instead of possessing the values of the ego, the positive values of the being should be in our heart and in our mind. Instead of having a gross identity, we should have the identity placed at the service of the being. Let us reflect on the necessity of becoming the living expression of the being. The being is the being, and the reason of the being is being itself. Let us clearly distinguish between what expression is and what self-expression is. The ego can express itself, but it will never have self-expression. The ego is expressed through the personality, and its expressions are subjective. It says what others said, it narrates what others narrated. It explains what others explained, but it does not have the evident self. Expression of the being. The real objective self-expression of the being is what matters. When the being expresses himself through us, he does it in a perfect and laconic manner. We have to disintegrate the ego on the basis of inner psychoanalysis in order for the verb, the word of the being, to be expressed through us. Self-esteem. Much is said about feminine vanity. Really, vanity is the living manifestation of self-esteem. The woman before a mirror is a complete narcissus, adoring herself, worshipping herself with frenzy. The woman adorns herself the best way she can. She paints herself, she curls her hair, the only purpose being for others to say, "You are gorgeous, you are beautiful, you are divine," etc. The I always enjoys it when people admire it. The I adorns itself in order for others to admire it. The I believes it is beautiful, pure, ineffable, holy, virtuous, etc. No one believes himself to be evil. All people consider themselves good and just. Self-esteem is something terrible. For example, the fanatics of materialism do not accept the superior dimensions of space due to self-esteem. They love themselves too much, and as is natural, they demand that the superior dimensions of space, of the cosmos, and of all ultra-sensible life subject themselves to their personal whims. They are not capable of going beyond their narrow criteria and their theories, beyond their beloved ego and their mental precepts. Death does not resolve the fatal problem of the ego. Only the death of the I can resolve the problem of human pain, but the I loves itself too much and does not want to die in any way. As long as the I exists, the wheel of samsara, the fatal wheel of human tragedy, will turn. When we are really in love, we renounce the I. In life, it is very rare to find someone who is really in love. Everyone is impassioned, and that is not love. People become impassioned when they meet someone they like, but when they discover their same errors, qualities, and defects in the other person. Then the loved one serves them as a mirror where they can contemplate themselves totally. Really, they are not in love with the loved one, they are only in love with themselves, and they enjoy seeing themselves in the mirror which the loved one is. That is where they meet and then suppose that they are in love. The I enjoys itself before the glass mirror, or feels happy seeing itself in the person that has its same qualities, virtues, and defects. Preachers speak much about the truth, but is it perhaps possible to know the truth when self-esteem exists in us? It is only by putting an end to self-esteem, it is only with the mind free of assumptions, that we can experience, in the absence of the I, that which is the truth. Many will criticize this work, the revolution of the dialectic. As always, pseudo-sapient persons will laugh at the revolutionary statements due to the crime of these teachings not coinciding with the mental assumptions and complicated theories that they have in their memories. Erudite persons are not capable of listening to revolutionary psychology with a spontaneous mind, free of mental assumptions, theories, preconceptions, etc. They are not capable of opening themselves up to what is new with an integral mind, with a mind that is not divided by the battle of the antithesis. Erudite persons only listen in order to compare with their assumptions stored in the memory. Erudite persons only listen to translate according to their language of prejudices and preconceptions and to arrive at the conclusion that the teachings of the revolution of the dialectic are fantasies. This is how erudite persons always are. Their minds are already so degenerated that they are not capable of discovering what is new. In its arrogance, the I wants everything to coincide with its theories and mental assumptions. The I wants all its whims to be fulfilled and for the cosmos in its totality, to subject itself to its laboratory experiments. The ego despises everyone who hurts its self-esteem. The ego adores its theories and preconceptions. Many times, we despise someone without any reason. Why? Simply because that person personifies some errors which we carry well hidden and we do not like another person to exhibit them. Really, deep within us, we carry the errors which we blame on others. No one is perfect in this world, we are all cut by the same scissors. Each of us is a bad shell within the bosom of the great reality. The one who does not have a defect in a specific direction, has it in another direction. Some do not covet money, but they covet fame, honors, love affairs, etc. Others do not commit adultery with someone else's wife, but they enjoy altering doctrines, mixing creeds in the name of the universal fraternity. Some are not jealous of their own wife, but they are jealous of friendships, creeds, sects, things, etc. This is how we human beings are, always cut by the same scissors. There is not a human being who does not adore himself. We have listened to individuals who enjoy entire hours and hours talking about themselves, of their marvels, of their talent, of their virtues, etc. The ego loves itself so much that it gets to envy others' well-being. Women adorn themselves with many things, partly out of vanity and partly to awaken envy in other women. They all envy each other. They all envy the other's dress, the beautiful necklace, etc. They all adore themselves and do not want to see themselves as less than the others. They are 100% narcissists. Some pseudo-occultists or brothers of many sects adore themselves so much that they have gotten to believe themselves as being fountains of humility and sanctity. They feel proud of their own humility. They are terribly proud. There is not a pseudo-occultist little brother or little sister who deep within does not presume of sanctity, splendor, and spiritual beauty. No pseudo-occultist brother or sister believes he or she is evil or perverse. They all presume of being saints and perfect even when they are really not only evil, yet perverse as well. The beloved ego adores itself too much and presumes, even when it does not say it, of being good and perfect. Ahimsa, non-violence. Ahimsa is the pure thought of India, non-violence. Ahimsa is really inspired by universal love. Himsa means to want to kill, to want to harm. Ahimsa is therefore the renunciation of all intention of death or harm caused by violence. Ahimsa is the opposite of egotism. Ahimsa is absolute altruism and love. Ahimsa is upright action. Mahatma Gandhi made of ahimsa the staff of his political doctrine. Gandhi defined the manifestation of ahimsa in this manner. Non-violence does not consist of renouncing all real struggle against evil. Non-violence, as I conceive it, establishes a more active campaign against evil than the law of the talion, whose nature itself results in the development of perversity. I raise before the immoral a mental opposition, and consequently, a moral one. I try to whet the tyrant's sword, not by clashing it against a better sharpened steel, but by disappointing his hopes by not offering any physical resistance. He will find in me a resistance of the soul which will escape his assault. This resistance will first of all blind him and will immediately force him to surrender. And the act of surrendering will not humiliate the aggressor, but will dignify him. There is not a more powerful weapon than a well-directed mind. The ego is the one that disunites, betrays and establishes anarchy within poor suffering humanity. Egoism, treason, and the lack of brotherhood has divided humanity. The I was neither created by God nor by the Spirit nor by matter. The I was created by our own mind and will cease to exist when we have comprehended it totally in all the levels of the mind. It is only through upright action, upright meditation, upright will, upright means of earning a living, upright effort, and upright memory that we can dissolve the I. It is urgent to comprehend in depth all of this if we really want the revolution of the dialectic. The personality should not be confused with the I. Really, the personality is formed during the 7 years of infancy, and the I is the error which is perpetuated from century to century, fortifying itself more and more each time with the mechanics of recurrence. The personality is energetic, is born with habits, customs, ideas, etc. during infancy, and is fortified with the experiences of life. Both the personality as well as the I should be disintegrated. We are more revolutionary in the psychological teachings than Gurdjieff and Ouspensky. The I utilizes the personality as an instrument of action. Personalism results from that mixture of ego and personality. Personality worship was invented by the I. Really, personalism engenders egoisms, hatreds, violences, etc. All of this is rejected by ahimsa. Personalism totally ruins esoteric organizations. Personalism produces anarchy and confusion. Personalism can totally destroy any organization. In each reincorporation return, the ego fabricates a new personality. Each person is different in each new re-embodiment. It is urgent to know how to live. When the I is dissolved, the great reality, true happiness, that which has no name, comes to us. Let us distinguish between the being and the I. The man of today only has the I. Man is a being that is not yet attained. It is urgent to attain the being. It is necessary to know that the being is limitless happiness. It is absurd to say that the being is the superior I, the divine I, etc. The being of a universal and cosmic type, cannot have the flavor of ego. Let us not try to make the I divine. Ahimsa is non-violence in thought, word, and deed. Ahimsa is respect for others' ideas, respect for all religions, schools, sects, organizations, etc. Let us not expect the I to evolve, because the I never perfects itself ever. We need a total revolution of consciousness. This is the only type of revolution that we accept. The doctrine of ahimsa is based on the revolution of the dialectic, on the revolution of consciousness. As we die from instant to instant, harmony among men slowly develops. As we die from instant to instant, the sense of cooperation keeps on totally replacing the sense of competition. As we die from moment to moment, goodwill replaces ill will little by little. Men of good will accept ahimsa. It is impossible to initiate a new order in our psyche while excluding the doctrine of non-violence. Ahimsa should be cultivated in homes by following the path of the perfect marriage. It is only with non-violence in thought and deed that happiness can reign in homes. Ahimsa should be the foundation of daily living, at the office, at the workshop, in the countryside, at home, on the street, etc. We should live the doctrine of non-violence. Gregarious conduct. Gregarious conduct is the tendency that the human machine has to mix with others, without distinction and without control of any type. Let us see what one does when in a group or in multitudes. I am sure that very few persons would dare to go out into the street to throw stones at someone. However, when in a group, they do so. Someone can slip into a public demonstration and, on being fired up with enthusiasm, ends up joining the masses in throwing stones, although later he will ask himself, why did I do it? When in a group, the human being behaves very differently. He does things that he would never do when alone. What is this due to? It is due to negative impressions to which he opens the doors, and he ends up doing things that he would never do alone. When one opens the doors to negative impressions, he not only alters the order of the emotional center which is in the heart, but he also makes it negative. One opens his doors, for example, to a negative emotion that a person brings full of anger because someone hurt him. Then, we end up aligning ourselves with that person, against the other who hurt him and also full of anger, without playing any role in the matter. Let us suppose that one opens the doors to the negative impressions of a drunkard. One ends up accepting a drink, then 2, 3, 10. In conclusion, one ends up a drunkard also. Let us suppose that one opens the doors to the negative impressions of a person of the opposite sex. One ends up most probably fornicating and committing all types of transgressions. If we open the doors to the negative impressions of a drug addict, we end up maybe smoking marijuana or consuming some type of enervators. As a conclusion, failure will come. In this manner, human beings infect each other within negative atmospheres. Thieves make other persons into thieves. Murderers infect someone else. Drug addicts infect other people, and drug addicts, thieves, usurers, murderers, etc. multiply. Why? Because we commit the error of always opening our doors to negative emotions, and that is never right. Let us select our emotions. If someone brings us positive emotions of light, of beauty, of harmony, of happiness, of love, of perfection, let us open the doors of our heart to him. But if someone brings us negative emotions of hate, violence, jealousy, of drugs, alcohol, of fornication and adultery, why should we open the doors of our heart? Let us close them. Close the doors to negative emotions. When one reflects on gregarious conduct, one can modify it perfectly and make something better out of life. The deformation of the word. The sound of a cannon, its explosion, destroys the glass of a window. On the other hand, a soft word pacifies anger or wrath, but an insulting, inharmonious word produces anger or melancholy, sadness, hatred, etc. It is said that silence is gold, but it is better to say that it is as incorrect to speak when one should be silent as it is to be silent when one should speak. There are criminal silences, there are infamous words. One should calculate with nobility the result of spoken words, for oftentimes one hurts others with words in an unconscious manner. Words full of ill-intended meaning produce fornications in the world of the mind. And arrhythmic words engender violence in the world of the cosmic mind. One should never condemn anyone with the verb because one should never judge anyone. Slander, gossip, and calumny have filled the world with pain and bitterness. If we work with sexual superdynamics, we have to comprehend that the creative energies are exposed to all kinds of modifications. These energies of the libido can be modified into powers of light or darkness. It all depends on the quality of the words. The perfect man speaks words of perfection. The Gnostic student who wishes to follow the path of the revolution of the dialectic should become accustomed to controlling the tongue. One should learn to handle the verb. It is not what enters the mouth that causes harm to man, but rather what comes out of it. The mouth supplies insults, intrigues, defamation, calumny, debates, all of these are what harm man. Avoid all types of fanaticism because we cause great harm to man, to our fellow men with it. One does not only hurt others with insulting words or with fine and artistic ironies, but also with the tone of the voice, with the inharmonious and arrhythmic accent. Knowing how to listen. We have to learn to listen. In order to learn to listen, we have to awaken consciousness. In order to learn to listen, we have to know how to be present. The one who listens always escapes via his psychological country and city. The human personality does not know how to listen, neither does the physical body because it is its vehicle. People are full of themselves, of their pride, of their faculties, of their theories. There is not a little corner or empty space for knowledge, for the verb. We should have our bowl facing upwards, like the Buddha, to receive the Christic word. Psychological listening is very difficult. We have to learn to be attentive in order to know how to listen. We have to become more receptive to the word. People do not remember their previous existences because they are not in their psychological house, because they are outside of it. One has to remember oneself. One has to relax the body as many times as we can during the day. People commit many errors because of forgetting the being. Great things happen to one when one remembers oneself. Consultation is necessary, but the important thing is to know how to listen. In order to know how to listen, one has to have the emotional, motor, and intellectual centers in supreme attention. False education impedes one from listening. False education harms the 5 centers of the human machine: the intellectual, motor, emotional, instinctive, and sexual centers. One has to listen with a spontaneous mind, free of mental assumptions, theories, and preconceptions. One has to open oneself to what is new with an integral mind, with the mind not divided by the battle of the antithesis. The exactness of the term. As the basis of his dialectic, Socrates demanded precision of terminology. In our revolution of the dialectic, we demand precision of the verb as a basis. The word, a distinguishing feature of humans, is the instrument of individual expression and communication among men. It is the vehicle of exterior language and the discharge or exteriorization of the complicated interior language, which can both be utilized by the being or by the ego. Plato, in the Dialogue Phaedo, expressed to one of his disciples a concept which is famous for its profundity and moral delicacy. As a human principle of idiomatic propriety, it says as follows: "Be it known unto you, my dear Crito, that speaking in an improper manner is not only committing a fault in what is said, but also a of damage which is caused to the souls." If we want to resolve problems, we should abstain from expressing one's opinion. Every opinion can be debated. We should resolve a problem by meditating on it. It is necessary to resolve it with the mind and the heart. We should learn to think for ourselves. It is absurd to repeat like parrots the opinions of others. When the ego is annihilated, the optional processes of the mind disappear. An opinion is the emission of a concept out of fear that another concept might be the truth, and this indicates ignorance. It is urgent to learn to not identify with problems. It is necessary to explore ourselves sincerely and then maintain mental and verbal silence. The psychological robot. The intellectual animal is similar to a robot programmed by mechanical wheels, and he is also similar to a clock because he keeps repeating the same movements of past existences. The human being, falsely called man, is a psychological robot who does nothing, everything happens to him. The being is the only one who does. The being causes to search what he wants because he is not a mechanical entity. One has to cease being an intellectual robot, because a robot always repeats the same thing. He does not have independence. The psychological robot is influenced by the laws of the moon, recurrence, conception, death, hatred, egoism, violence, conceit, haughtiness, self-importance, immoderate covetousness, etc. One has to work with sexual superdynamics in order to create a permanent center of gravity and to become independent of the moon. In order to cease being a psychological robot, it becomes necessary to dominate oneself. Faust achieved it, but Cornelius Agrippa did not achieve it because he set himself to theorize. People are interested in exploiting the world, but what is more important is to exploit oneself, because the one who exploits himself dominates the world. The psychological robot who wants to become a man and then a superman should develop the capacity of sustaining the notes. When someone really wants to cease being a machine, he has to undergo the first crisis, mi, fa, and then undergo the second crisis, la, si. The key of winners to pass the crisis and to cease being a psychological robot is choice, change, and decision. The entire work is done in 7 scales. And one acquires the near-omniscient sound of the universe. Anger. Anger annihilates the capacity to think and resolve the problems it originates. Obviously, anger is a negative emotion. 2 negative emotions of anger that confront each other do not achieve peace nor creative comprehension. Unquestionably, when we project anger onto another human being, a crumbling of our image is always produced, and this is never convenient in the world of the interrelations. The diverse processes of anger lead the human being towards horrible social, economic, and psychological failures. It is clear that one's health is also affected by anger. There exist certain foolish persons who enjoy anger since it gives them a certain air of superiority. In these cases, anger is combined with pride. Anger is also usually combined with conceit and even with self-sufficiency. Kindness is a much more crushing force than anger. An angry argument is nothing but excitement lacking conviction. On confronting anger, we should decide, we should choose the type of emotion that is most convenient thus. Whoever lets himself be controlled by anger destroys his own image. The man who has complete self-control will always be on top. Frustration, fear, doubt and guilt originate the processes of anger. Frustration, fear, doubt and guilt cause anger. Whoever liberates himself from these four negative emotions will dominate the world. To accept negative passions is something that goes against self-respect. Anger is of crazy persons, it serves no purpose, it leads us to violence. The goal of violence is to lead us to violence, and the latter produces more violence. The personality. The personality is multiple and has many hidden depths. In it is deposited the karma of previous existences, karma in the process of fulfillment or crystallization. The impressions which are not digested become new psychic aggregates, and what is more serious, they become new personalities. The personality is not homogeneous, but rather heterogeneous and plural. One should select impressions in the same manner that one chooses the things of life. If one forgets oneself at a given instant, before a new event, new I is formed, and if they are very strong, they become new personalities within the personality. Therein lies the cause of many traumas, complexes, and psychological conflicts. An impression which is not digested which gets to form a personality within the personality, and which is not accepted, becomes a source of frightening conflicts. Not all the personalities which one carries in the personality are accepted, the latter giving origin to many traumas, complexes, phobias, etc. Before all else, it is necessary to comprehend the multiplicity of the personality, that it is multiple in itself. Therefore, there could be someone who may have disintegrated the psychic aggregates, but if he does not disintegrate the personality, we will not be able to attain authentic enlightenment and the joy of living. When one knows oneself more and more, one knows others more and more each time. The individual with an ego does not see things clearly and makes mistakes. Those who have ego fail because they lack judgment, even when a tremendous logic exists in their analysis. If impressions are not digested, new I is created. One has to learn to select impressions. It is not a matter of being better. What interests us is change. The being surges forth when one has changed and ceased to exist. The undesirable elements which we carry in our interior are the ones which control our perceptions, preventing us from having an integral perception which brings us joy and happiness. Cathexis. The psychic energy, cathexis, processing itself as an executive force, is formidable. The reserves of intelligence are the different parts of the being and are denominated as bound cathexis or psychic energy in a potential and static state. The bound cathexis orients us in the work related with the disintegration of the ego and the liberation of the mind. The bound cathexis, contained in the mind, guides us in the work related with revolutionary psychology and with integral revolution. The values of the being constitute the bound cathexis. Only the bound cathexis can liberate the mind through the disintegration of the undesirable psychic elements which have been segregated by means of structural and transactional analysis. Bound cathexis is different from loose cathexis, since the latter is the psychic energy which the ego utilizes to dominate the mind and the body for its manifestation. We have to permit the bound cathexis, which is the dynamic psychic energy, to be the one to direct our existence. We have to work psychologically in order for the bound cathexis to enter into activity and dominate, and govern the free cathexis, which is the energy of the body and which has always been pitifully dominated by the loose cathexis, which is the ego. Mystical death. We have suffered much with the members of the Gnostic movement. Many have sworn fidelity before the altar of the sanctuaries. Many have solemnly promised to work in the great work until total self-realization. Many are those who have cried swearing to never ever withdraw from the Gnostic movement, and, however, it is painful to say it, everything has been in vain. Almost everyone fled, they became enemies, blaspheming, fornicating, committing adultery, and went on the black path. Really, these terrible contradictions of the human being are due to the human being having a fatal foundation and a tragic basis. Said foundation is the plurality of the I, the plurality of the loose cathexis which we all carry within. It is urgent to know that the I is a mass of psychic energies, loose cathexis, which reproduce in the lower animal depths of man. Each loose cathexis is a small I which enjoys certain auto-independence. These I's, these loose cathexes, struggle among themselves. I should read a newspaper, says the intellectual I. I will ride a bicycle, argues the motor I. I am hungry, declares the I of digestion. I am cold, says the I of metabolism. No one will impede me, exclaims the passionate I in defense of any of these loose cathexes. Conclusion: the I is a legion of loose cathexis. These loose cathexes have already been studied by Franz Hartmann. They live in the lower animal depths of man. They eat, sleep, reproduce, and live at the expense of our vital principles or free cathexis muscular and nervous kinetic energy. Each of the I which in their mass constitute the loose cathexis. The I projects itself in the different levels of the mind and travels, longing for the satisfaction of its desires. The I, the ego, the loose cathexis, can never perfect itself. Man is the city of 9 gates. Within this city live many citizens which do not even know each other. Each of these citizens, each of those small I has its projects and its own mind. Those are the merchants which Jesus had to cast out of the temple with the whip of willpower. Those merchants should be killed. Now we will understand the reason for so many internal contradictions in the individual. As long as the loose cathexis exists, there can be no peace. The I are the causa causorum of all the internal contradictions. The I which swears fidelity to gnosis is replaced by another which hates it. Conclusion: man is an irresponsible being that does not have a permanent center of gravity. Man is a being which is not yet attained. Man is not yet a man, he is merely an intellectual animal. It is a very great error to call soul the legion of the I. Really and truly, man has within his essence the psychic material, the material for the soul, but he does not yet have a soul. The Gospels say, "Of what use is it to win the world if you are going to lose your soul?" Jesus said to Nicodemus that it was necessary to be born from water and the Spirit in order to enjoy the attributes which correspond to a true soul. It is impossible to fabricate a soul if we do not undergo mystical death. It is only through the death of the I that we can establish a permanent center of consciousness within our own interior essence. Said center is that which is called soul. Only a man with a soul can have true continuity of purpose. It is only in a man with a soul that internal contradictions do not exist and there is true inner peace. The I foolishly spends the psychic material, the cathexis, in explosions of anger, covetousness, lust, envy, pride, laziness, gluttony, etc. It is logical that as long as the psychic material, the cathexis, does not accumulate, the soul cannot be fabricated. In order to fabricate something, one needs the materia prima. Without the materia prima, nothing can be fabricated because from nothing, nothing can be obtained. When the I begins to die, the materia prima begins to accumulate. When the materia prima begins to accumulate, the establishment of a center of permanent consciousness is initiated. When the I has absolutely died, the center of permanent consciousness has remained totally established. The capital of psychic material accumulates when the ego dies, since the squanderer of energy is eliminated. In this manner, the permanent center of consciousness is established. Such a marvelous center is the soul. Only the one who has established within himself the permanent center of consciousness can be faithful to gnosis. Only he can have continuity of purpose. Those who do not possess such a center can be in gnosis today and against it tomorrow, today with one school, tomorrow with another. This type of person does not have real existence. Mystical death is an arduous and difficult area of the revolution of the dialectic. The loose cathexis is dissolved on the basis of rigorous comprehension. Interaction with our fellow men, dealing with people, is the mirror where we can see ourselves at full length. In dealing with people, our hidden defects leap forward, they flourish, and if we are vigilant, we then see them. Every defect should first be intellectually analyzed and then studied with meditation. Many individuals attained perfect chastity in the physical world, but ended up being great fornicators and frightening sinners when they were subjected to the test in the superior worlds. They had put an end to their defects in the physical world, but in other levels of the mind, they continued with their loose cathexis. When a defect is totally comprehended in all the levels of the mind, its corresponding loose cathexis disintegrates, in other words, a small I dies. It is urgent to die from instant to instant. The soul is born with the death of the I. We need the death of the I in a total M in order for the plenitude of the bound cathexis, the being, to express himself. Dissolving the loose cathexis. It is only by minutely studying the loose cathexis, the I, that we can totally dissolve it. We should minutely observe the thought processes, the different functionalisms of desire, the habits which form our personality, the sophisms of distraction, the fallacy of the ego, and our sexual impulses. We have to study how they react before the impacts of the exterior world and see how they associate with each other. By comprehending all the processes of the loose cathexis, of the pluralized I, the latter is dissolved. Then, only the divinity is manifested through and within us. Negligence. Negligence and carelessness lead every human being to failure. To be negligent is, as we would say, nec leger, to not elect, to surrender to the arms of failure. Negligence is of the ego, and its opposite is intuition, which is of the being. The ego can neither elect nor distinguish, but the being can. It is only by means of the living incarnation of the revolution of the dialectic that we will learn to elect in order to not have any more failures in life. Transactions. 97% of human thoughts are negative and harmful. What we are here is the result of our own mental processes. Man should auto-explore his own mind if he wishes to identify himself, value himself, and auto-imagine himself correctly. The difficulty of profound, introspective analysis lies in countertransference. This difficulty is eliminated through structural and transactional analysis. It is important to segregate and to dissolve certain undesirable psychic aggregates which are fixed in our mind in a traumatic manner. Transactional and structural analysis are intelligently combined in the matter of the exploration of the ego. Any psychic aggregate should be previously segregated before its final dissolution. The particular characteristic, psychological trait. All human beings are 100% mechanical. Unconscious beings working with their consciousness asleep without knowing where they come from or where they are going, they are profoundly hypnotized. The hypnosis, which is collective and flows in all of nature, is derived from the abominable Kundartagwaiter organ. This race is hypnotized, unconscious, submerged in the most profound sleep. Awakening is only possible by destroying the I, the ego. We have to recognize with entire clarity that sometimes we have talked about the particular characteristic psychological trait, PCPT, of each person. Certainly, each person has his particular characteristic psychological trait, that is true. Some will have lust as their characteristic trait, others will have hatred, for others it will be covetousness, etc. The trait is the sum of several particular characteristic psychological elements. For each PCPT, a definite event, a precise circumstance, always exists. That a man is lustful? There will always be circumstances of lust in his life accompanied with specific problems. These circumstances are always repeated. We need to know our PCPT if we want to move on to a superior level of the being and eliminate from ourselves the undesirable elements which constitute the psychological trait. There is a concrete fact in life, and it is the discontinuity of nature that is obvious. All phenomena are discontinuous, and this means that we will never arrive at perfection. Through evolution, we need to become true solar men in the most complete sense of the word. One is the level of the worthy and modest woman, and another is the level of the unworthy and immodest woman. There are different levels of the being. Have we noticed our own level of being, of the level of the being where we are? Are we conscious that we are hypnotized and asleep? The intellectual animal becomes identified not only with external things, but he also goes around identified with himself, with his lustful thoughts, with his drunken sprees, with his anger, with his covetousness, with his self-importance, with his vanity, with mystical pride, with self-merit, etc. Have we perhaps reflected that we have not only become identified with the exterior, but also with that which is vanity and pride? For example, did we triumph today? Did we triumph over the day, or did the day triumph over us? Are we certain that we did not become identified with a morbid, covetous, proud thought, with an insult or a preoccupation or debt, etc.? Are we sure that we triumphed over the day, or did the day triumph over us? What did we do today? Have we noticed the level of the being in which we are? Did we move on to a superior level of the being, or did we remain where we were? Can we perhaps believe that it is possible to move on to a superior level of the being if we do not eliminate specific psychological defects? Are we perhaps content with the level of the being in which we presently find ourselves? If we are going to remain our entire life in one level of the being, then what are we doing? In each level of the being exists specific bitterness, specific sufferings, that is obvious. Everyone complains that he suffers, that he has problems, of the state he is in and of his struggles. Therefore, I ask one thing: does the intellectual animal concern himself with moving on to a superior level of the being? Obviously, as long as we are in the level of the being in which we are, all the adverse circumstances that we already know and all the bitterness in which we are will have to be repeated again. Over and over again, identical difficulties will surge. Do we want to change? Do we want to no longer have the problems which afflict us, the economic, political, social, spiritual, family, lustful problems, etc.? Do we want to avoid difficulties? We have no other solution but to move on to a superior level of the being. Each time that we take a step towards a superior level of the being, we become independent of the executing forces of the loose cathexis. Therefore, if we do not know our PCPT, we are doing very badly. We need to know it if we want to move on to a superior level of the being and eliminate from ourselves the undesirable elements which constitute that PCPT. Otherwise, how will we move on to a superior level of the being? The intellectual animal wants to stop suffering, but he does nothing to change. He does not struggle to move on to a superior level of the being. Therefore, how can he change? All phenomena are discontinuous. The dogma of evolution is useless, except for us to become stagnant. I know many pseudo-esoterists, sincere people and of good heart, who are bottled up in the dogma of evolution, who wait for time to perfect them and millions of years elapse and they never perfect themselves. Why? Because such persons do nothing to change the levels of the being, they always remain on the same rung. Therefore, we need to go beyond evolution and enter the revolutionary path, the path of the revolution of consciousness or of the dialectic. Evolution and involution are two laws which are simultaneously processed in all of creation. They constitute the mechanical axis of nature. But they will never lead us to liberation. The laws of evolution and involution are purely material and have nothing to do with the inner self-realization of the being. We do not deny them, they exist, but they are not good for psychological revolution. We need to be revolutionary. We need to enter the path of the revolution of consciousness. How could we move on to a superior level of the being if we were not revolutionary? Let us observe the different rungs of a ladder. They are discontinuous. Similarly, the different levels of the being are like that. To each level of the being belong a specific number of activities. When one moves to a higher level of the being, one has to take a leap and abandon all the activities one had in the inferior level of the being. To my memory come all those times of my life, 20, 30, 40 years ago, which were transcended. Why? Because I found superior levels of the being. It is what constituted for me the me importance. My activities of that era were suspended, cut off, because in the superior rungs of the being there are other activities which are completely different. If one moves to a superior level of the being, one has to leave behind many things which are presently important to us, which belong to the level in which we are. The transition to another level of the being includes, therefore, a leap, and that leap is rebellious. It is never of an evolving type. It is always revolutionary, dialectic. There are men, busybodies, who feel they are like a god. This type of individuals are megalomaniacs of the worst kind, of the worst taste. The one who feels he is a sage because he has some pseudo-esoteric teachings in his mind and thinks that he is already a great initiate, has fallen into megalomania. He is full of himself. Each of us is nothing but a vile worm of the mud of the earth. When I speak in this manner, I begin with myself. To be full of oneself, to have false images of oneself, fantasies of oneself, is to be in inferior levels of the being. One is identified with oneself thinking that one is going to have a lot of money, a beautiful, latest model car, or that one's fiancé loves him, that one is a great man, or that one is a sage. There are many forms of becoming identified with oneself. One has to begin by not becoming identified with oneself, and then, not becoming identified with things outside. When one, for example, does not become identified with an offender, one forgives him, loves him, the offender cannot hurt him, and if someone hurts one's self-esteem, but one does not become identified with self-esteem, it is therefore clear that one cannot feel any pain since it does not hurt one. If one does not become identified with vanity, one does not care about walking on the street even if with mended trousers. Why? Because one is not identified with vanity. If we first of all become identified with ourselves and then with the vanities of the exterior world, then we cannot forgive. Let us remember the Lord's Prayer. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. But I say something more. It is not enough to simply forgive, but we also have to cancel the debts. Someone could forgive an enemy but would never ever cancel the debts. We have to be sincere. We need to cancel. The Lord's Gospel also says, "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth." This is a phrase that no one has understood. Blessed are, we would say, the non-resentful. If one is resentful, how could one be meek? The resentful person lives keeping count, and I who did him so many favors. I protected him, I did so many deeds of charity for him, and look at how this friend has paid me back when I have helped him so much, and now he is incapable of helping me. This is the accounting of the resentful. How could one be meek if one is full of resentments? The one who is full of resentments lives keeping count at all times, therefore, he is not meek. How could he be blessed? What is understood by blessed? What is understood by happiness? Are we sure that we are happy? Who is happy? I have known persons who say, "I am happy. I am content with my life. I am joyful." But I have heard these same persons say, "So and so bothers me. I dislike that person. I do not know why I cannot get what I have always desired." Therefore, they are not happy. What really happens is that they are hypocrites, that is all. To be happy is very difficult. For that, one first of all needs to be meek. The word beatitude means inner happiness, not within 1,000 years, but now, right here. In the instant that we are living. If we truly become meek through non-identification, we will then get to be happy. But it is necessary not only to not become identified with our thoughts of lust, hatred, vengeance, rancor, resentment, but also to eliminate from ourselves the red demons of Seth, those psychic aggregates which personify our defects of a psychological type. We have to comprehend, for example, what the process of resentment is. We have to dissect resentment. When one arrives at the conclusion that resentment is due to possessing self-esteem in our interior, we then struggle to eliminate the I of self-esteem. But we have to comprehend it in order to be able to eliminate it. We could not eliminate it if we have not previously comprehended it. In order to be able to eliminate, one needs Devi Kundalini Shakti. It is only she who can disintegrate any psychological defect, including the I of self-esteem. Are we sure that we are not resentful towards someone? Which of us is sure of not being resentful and of not keeping account? Who? If we want to become independent from lunar mechanicity, we have to eliminate from ourselves the I of resentment and of self-esteem. When one understands this, one advances on the path which leads to the final liberation. It is only by means of the fire of Aries, the Lamb, of the incarnated reign, of the inner Christ, that we can truly burn those inhuman elements which we carry in our interior. As consciousness becomes unbottled, we will awaken. Consciousness cannot awaken as long as it continues bottled up within psychic aggregates which in their mass constitute the myself, the I, the loose cathexis. We need to undergo mystical death here and now. We need to die from instant to instant. It is only with death that the novel arrives. If the germ does not die, the plant is not born. We need to learn to live, to liberate ourselves from that lunar heredity that we have. Methodology of the work. Before knowing and eliminating the PCPT, we should work intensely in a general manner in relation to all the defects, since the PCPT has very profound roots which come from past existences. In order to know it, it is necessary to have worked in an untiring manner and with a methodology of work, for at least 5 years. We must have order in the work and precision in the elimination of the defects. For example, during the day, the defects of lust in the morning, of pride in the afternoon and anger at night have manifested themselves to one. Indubitably, we are seeing a succession of facts and manifestations. Therefore, we ask ourselves, how and on what defect that became manifested during the day should we work? Really and truly, the answer is simple. At nightfall or at the hour of meditation, with the body relaxed, we move on to practice the retrospective exercise on the facts and manifestations of the ego during the day. Once reconstructed, put in order and numbered, we proceed with the work of comprehension. First, we will work on an egotistical event to which we could dedicate some 20 minutes, then, another psychological event to which we could dedicate 10 minutes, and 15 minutes to another manifestation. It all depends on the gravity and intensity of the egotistical events. Once the facts and manifestations of the loose cathexis of the myself have been put in order, we can work on them at night or during the hour of meditation, in a tranquil manner and with methodical order. In each work on this or that defect, event, and manifestation enter the following factors: discovery, judgment, and execution. The 3 aforementioned factors are applied to each psychological defect in the following manner: discovery, when it has been seen in action, in manifestation; judgment or comprehension, when all its roots are known; execution, with the help of the Divine Mother Kundalini, through the wise practice of sexual superdynamics. Sophisms of distraction. Sophisms are the false reasonings which induce us to err, and which are gestated by the ego in the 49 levels of the subconscious. The subconscious is the sepulchre of the past upon which burns the fatuous flame of thought and in which the sophisms of distraction are gestated. The latter lead the intellectual animal to fascination, and thereby, to the sleep of consciousness. What is kept within the sepulchre is rottenness and bones of the dead, but the sepulchral stone is very beautiful and on it fatally burns the flame of the intellect. If we want to dissolve the I, we have to uncover the subconscious sepulchre and exhume the bones and rottenness of the past. The sepulchre is very beautiful outside, but within, it is filthy and abominable. We need to become gravediggers. To insult another person, to hurt his intimate feelings, to humiliate him, is something that is very easy when it is done supposedly to correct him for his own good. This is how irate people think, those who, while believing that they do not hate, hate without knowing that they hate. Many are the people who struggle in life to be rich. They work, save, and strive for excellence in everything, but the secret trigger of all their activities is secret envy, which is ignored, which does not come out to the surface, which remains hidden in the sepulchre of the subconscious. It is difficult to find in life someone who does not envy the beautiful house, the brand new car, the intelligence of the leader, the beautiful suit, the good social position, the magnificent fortune, etc. Almost always, the best efforts of citizens have envy as their secret trigger. Many are the persons who enjoy a good appetite and despise gluttony, but they always eat more than normal. Many are the people who watch their spouse in an exaggerated manner, but they despise jealousy. Many are the students of certain pseudo-esoteric and pseudo-occultist schools who despise the things of this world and who do not work at all because everything is vanity, but they are jealous about their virtues and never accept anyone classifying them as lazy. Many are those who hate flattery and praise, but they have no inconvenience in humiliating with their modesty the poor poet who composed a verse for them with the only purpose of obtaining a coin to buy bread. Many are the judges who know how to fulfill their duty, but also, many are the judges who with the virtue of duty have assassinated others. Numerous were the heads that fell at the guillotine of the French Revolution. All executioners fulfill their duty, and already, millions are the innocent victims of executioners. No executioner feels guilty, they all fulfill their duty. Prisons are full of innocent people, but the judges do not feel guilty because they are fulfilling their duty. Full of anger, the father or mother whip and beat their small children, but they do not feel remorse because supposedly, they are fulfilling their duty and they would accept everything except being classified as cruel. It is only with a still and silent mind, submerged in deep meditation, that we will be able to extract from within the sepulchre of the subconscious all the secret rottenness which we carry within. It is nothing pleasant to see the dark sepulchre with all the bones and rottenness of the past. Each hidden defect smells awful inside its grave, but seeing it, it is easy to burn it and reduce it to ashes. The fire of comprehension reduces to dust the rottenness of the past. When they analyze the subconscious, many students of psychology commit the mistake of dividing themselves between analyzer and analyzed, intellect and subconscious, subject and object, perceiver and perceived. Those types of divisions are the sophisms of distraction which the ego presents us. These types of divisions create antagonisms and struggles between the intellect and the subconscious, and where there are struggles and battles, there cannot be stillness and silence of the mind. It is only in mental stillness and silence that we can extract from within the dark grave of the subconscious all the rottenness of the past. Let us not say my eye has envy, hatred, jealousy, anger, lust, etc. It is best to not divide ourselves. It is better to say, I have envy, hatred, jealousy, anger, lust, etc. When we study the sacred books of India, we become enthusiastic thinking on the supreme Brahman and in the union of Atman with Brahman. But really, as long as the psychological eye with its sophisms of distraction exists, we will be unable to achieve the bliss of uniting ourselves with the universal spirit of life. Once the eye is dead, the universal spirit of life is in us like the flame in the lamp.